something a little different for Truth for a Change. A studio shot, me and some wonderful people who've written some books. The books, Kenneth Kish's Despised Things, Lynn Gilmore's Consensual Consequences. Did my hand get in the way of anything? No, we're good. And here's these wonderful people who have fought a brave fight in dimensions I think will be surprising. I did listen to a Paula Gloria version, rabbit hole version of your presentations, and I was quite impressed that there is a dimension of wrongness within our society, our legal system, our social system, our religious system, and this is the beginning of our waking up to a new realm. I think one word that comes to mind is sex. Our country, our religious, our notions of sex, and to be continued. So, how would you describe a theme here?
Our theme here is to bring an awareness to the sex offender registry and those who are on it.
The sex offender registry, those three words, the meaning we've given them in our society, what the politicians play off. Continue.
We are all three authors of three different books, and we all have our own, we all share our story of how that we either became on the registry or we have someone that we know that's on the registry. And the stories are all different, but it doesn't matter what your story is. If you're on the registry, you're depicted as the most vile, the most disgusting, the most heinous type of a human being on the face of the planet, even though it may have been a consensual act, or even though it may have been a public urination act. If you fall on the registry, you're seen the same. If you were the peeping, child molesting pedophile who hides behind trees with dark trench coats, ready to pounce on kids.
It's very rare.
Right, you're seen that way whether just for being on the registry. And we would like to really take an opportunity to share with your audience what the truth of the matter is and how harmful not only is this to those on the registry, but those who are falling into this media hysteria, this fear-mongering, and really it damages those people who jump on that wagon that want to attack those on the registry, because it lowers their own vibration, it lowers their own spiritual self.
Derek, I didn't mention your book, which is online.
Yes, my book is Once Fallen. It's available through my website at oncefallen.com or through Amazon. It's only an ebook at the moment, but I'm working on getting printed copies.
Now, what Ken was just talking about, could you fill us in on some of the downside, what happens, unfortunately, to people on the registry?
Well, you know, the registry was originally intended to showcase the, quote, worst of the worst. And over the years it has grown drastically. It was originally intended to be a list for law enforcement officers only, to have high-risk individuals to look at as possible suspects in the event of one of these rare high-profile cases that we see in the media all the time, a missing child. And that's usually what people equate the registry to, but it's not really been the case. Over the last few years it's grown so much. We have around 750,000 people on the registry, and the crimes can range anywhere from the kinds of crimes that people fear the most in society to the more petty ones, the public urination, prostitution, you know, kids having consensual relations with other kids. We talked already about how in Texas there were over 4,000 children on the registry, some as young as 10 years old. Delaware has a 9-year-old on the list. And with that comes being on the list, obviously people are worse, the pedophiles, the ones who molest and kill children. And the laws have reflected that in the way that they have handled, you know, how our society handles sex crimes. They pass these laws mostly unanimously without much thought by bypassing the normal rules of Congress, suspension of the rules that's usually reserved for stuff like Hurricane Katrina. So laws against sex offenders passed quicker than laws that were supposed to, fund FEMA and the programs to help people on Katrina get back on their feet, because that is seen as such an important part of our society. So we pass laws without giving much thought to the consequences. And what we're here, not just as authors but as activists, as we try to educate individuals about the consequences of these laws. We're not saying that people shouldn't be punished for doing. We're saying is the amount of punishment that is happening once people serve their time and is completely finished with their sentence. These arbitrary passages of laws, and many of them have nothing to do with controlling behavior, and that's why we're trying to show the consequences to get people to understand. We're trying to reform the laws through our various groups.
Now, Lynn, your book is that word, consequences.
Yes. The reason I titled this book is because, my husband, before we met, when he was single, he engaged in a consensual act with an underage female. And consensual it's a complex word, because the person that he did this with was willing, but yet she wasn't legally able to give consent. So there lies the conundrum. But so that's why the consensual is there. And the consequences are, of course, the result of that act and what happened afterward.
Now, that's a play on words, because typically the ill-informed would limit their wonderings to just the tragedy of sex happening to 15, 16, 17, whatever it is, which is, I would say, first of all, arbitrary. That it takes some argument to even make the proposition that sex is such a bad thing to happen to somebody.
Right.
And certainly by consent, it is arguably a good thing. In Judaism, the age of manhood is 13,
Yes.
as a clue that how arbitrary, whatever it is, number we pick. It is among those things unfortunate in our whole social culture as a people that we are victims of particular religions. Another thing I'd like to talk about, but I'd like to hear about your organization.
Well, when I began writing the book, I was a member of a group called SOSEN, which stands for Sex Offender Solutions and Education Network. It's a national organization. We're online. It's sosen.org. Easy to find.
That's spelled
They have SOSEN.org.
Okay.
And it's an organization for people anyone who is affected by the sex offender registry, be it an offender themselves or someone who has a loved one or a friend that's a registered sex offender. There's all kinds of materials available on the website.
Now, when you say materials,
Articles, brochures,
Information.
template letters, all kinds of,
Research.
lots of research, all kinds of information. Plus, there is a member forum, which is a place where it's a community of people, and they can all go on there and share their stories if they want to. No one there is judged for what they have done. We're all like-minded. We're all just trying to make a better life for one another.
you want to fill in a little, Derek?
Yes, SOSEN, I've been a member of them for years as well. I've done lots of work for them in addition to the work that I've done for my own website. We're part of a network of individuals. In addition to SOSEN, here in New York State, we have a what we call a state affiliate website, New York RSOL, which RSOL stands for Reform Sex Offender Laws. So some states have a state individual that's dedicated to dealing with the laws of each state. And SOSEN works on a national level because there's federal laws, but then we also have state laws. So the state laws and the federal laws can be different. The federal has the Adam Walsh Act, but not every state has adopted the Adam Walsh Act. So each state has their own set of guidelines, their own set of ills. So here in New York State, New York has, the New York RSOL site. I can't think of the exact web address offhand, but you can Google it. It's pretty easy to find. Plus, it's on my website as well.
It's called the New York State.
Yeah, New York RSOL.
It's a chapter of reformsexoffenderlaws.org. All
How
one
about
word.
with the O? Why is that R-O?
Yeah, well,
Registered
Reform.
offender.
yeah, Reform Sex
Reform.
Offender Laws.
Dot
It's-
org.
Okay.
And so anyways, they handle issues specific to their state. And I believe New York was one of the states that actually flat out rejected the Adam Walsh Act.
Uh-huh. That's progress.
That's major progress. So the Adam Walsh Act is a very complex law.
And it makes all kinds of additional requirements after you serve your time. It is, give us some of the texture of the aggravation.
Well,
You said earlier in the earlier program
there's so many.
where you can move, where you can live, where you can work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
residency restrictions.
There's so many laws there's so many restrictions that we have to live under that people don't realize. Okay, the laws that they pass are supposed to be intended to prevent certain kinds of behavior. So we have all sorts of crazy bans that have nothing to do with preventing, sexual offending, like the small business loans. What does getting a small business loan from the federal government have to do, anything at all to do with preventing sexual abuse?
Well, your story is that you wanted to start a business, you applied for a loan, and they said, boing, because you're a sex offender, therefore, no money.
Well, there was the exam. In my particular case, it was the Examiner. The Examiner.com is a website that allows independent people to write independently, much like the news media, the Huffington Post. There's a host of other internet websites that allow you to freelance write. You make a small amount of money to write for them based upon readership, following, and that sort of thing. So it's not like I was going to make a lot of money, but it would have been nice to have a little extra spending money on the side to supplement my meager income. But yet, after 2 months, they came back to me and said, "Oh, you're a registered sex offender, so we don't want people like you writing for us." So I'm like, "Okay, what's the big deal? Should we not have a voice?" And they just flat out said, "Well, you can have a voice, but you're not going to have it on my website." And so
we kind of touched on two areas here, and that's one of them. But the one just before that was the restrictions. Is that once you land yourself on the registry, if they pass a new restriction, it goes back to you. It's
Ex post facto.
Yes, ex post facto, and it doesn't make any difference because it's not a law. They're regulations and rules.
I would love to add something to that. The state of Missouri is very bipolar on this issue. On one hand, they adopted the Adam Walsh Act, and they want to back out of the Adam Walsh Act. They're actually trying to pass a law right now in their state to get away from it. But on the other hand, they are trying to pass. They actually want to pass a piece of legislation that, if it passes, they will rewrite their state constitution to make an exception to the ex post facto law specifically for sex offenders.
Wow. The whole ultimate rationale is sex as something associated with the devil, or it's hard
We
to win the
demonize
mind.
it. We demonize sexuality as a human. Well, this is my understanding of how things have come. And you take sexual offense and deviations are marked between different class, economic, social structures. They're very marked. Someone on the lower social economic scale is liable to be, actually those on a lower social scale and those on the higher social scale are the most promiscuous, because those on a lower scale feel they have nothing to lose. Those on the higher end of the economic social scale feel they are beyond social retribution, so they feel they can get away with it.
And they do.
And they do. It's the great middle class is where the conflict is and where the most hypocrisy is. And
like, for example, what are the things that are offered? You said templates. These are
letter templates.
for what kinds of situations?
If they want to write their legislators, we encourage them to use some of our template letters, which are real basic, but they can download
Give me an
those.
example of some language. What would you want to say to a legislator?
Well, like in a
Please don't-
particular state,
Yeah.
they've got some kind of legislation on the books. Okay, this state is going to enforce or introduce residency restrictions. Last year,
Like you can't
in
be
Arkansas.
that close to a.
Yeah, last year in Arkansas, not this year, but last year in Arkansas, they wanted to include high-level 2 offenders in their restrictions for residency restrictions. They had already put level 3 and level 4 offenders on that list, and now they wanted to include some level 2 offenders. And so this would be where someone could take one of our template letters that lists all the reasons why this is bad law, and they could just put in a small paragraph about themselves, their own personal story, and then send that letter off to all the legislators and the politicians who are trying to get this law passed. We were actually, those of us in Arkansas who were fighting that law, we were actually able to get that law held off or dropped. They may try to bring it back next year. Next year there are quite a few laws that are going to be presented. We're going to be very busy in Little Rock next year.
You know, a point, Derek, that you made just came to me is that they have difficulty talking about this out loud when the laws are being considered by these politicians, but the writing of it forces it under their nose, I guess, is what we're talking about.
A lot of it is, I understand a lot of how politicians work. What people don't realize is a person gets elected, it's a popularity contest. You know, it's a glorified beauty contest, you know, and the Queen goes to her little, goes to her little spot on Congress, and now all of a sudden you go and you actually sit down to do your job, and you get this book, and it's this thick. The Adam Walsh Act was 112 pages of the most boring legislation you'll ever read. And nobody sits and reads that stuff. What they do is they do what everybody else does. They click on the TV and they let the media do it. Well, the problem is that you're not getting experts. The politicians are not experts. The media aren't experts. What they do is they look for catchphrases they can use, and they take a couple key points. You know, even us in our movement, that, for lack of a better term, for our various groups, we have key selling points. When we talk about residency restrictions, for example, the most glaring example was the Julia Tuttle Causeway in Miami, where the laws were so restrictive in the city of Florida that people were forced to live under this causeway in Miami because there was no legal residence in the city. So, that's a selling point. And then on the other side of that spectrum was that Iowa, the state of Iowa, had passed legislation to reverse residency restrictions, because at the time before Julia Tuttle Causeway, they had already passed the most restrictive residency laws in the country, and what they found was it drove people underground. It created large numbers of homeless registrants, and all this time,
off the registry too. Some people don't register anymore, and they go underground and they disappear.
And on top of that, while all this was happening, the sex crime rates actually increased, which, it's not huge numbers, but in Iowa, 12 extra crimes a year, is a big deal. So they went back and said, we cannot keep this law on the books, so we take that. So in 2009, well, they actually took them 2 years to do it. In 2007, they first debated it, but they were too afraid to, because, see, they created a monster. When they residency restriction laws, they created their own monster, and they were afraid because the media knows that these laws are popular. They made these laws popular by using these laws to springboard their political careers, and now they saw the harm that it was doing. They did not take that into effect when they tried to pass this legislation. They steamrolled it through. You look at how these laws are being voted in: 97 to nothing, 420 something to nothing. You know, you don't see football blowout scores like that. You know, it's just it's so much of a blowout. It's steamrolled through. It's like they just rubber stamp it and move on to the next thing. They don't read the law. They don't sit and think about how these laws impact people until the laws have passed and has been sitting for so many years. And now, 15 years later, they're starting to see the consequences of the registry.
And it's always much more difficult to go retroactive than it is to go pro. It's easy to put the rubber stamp, but then when you have to stand up and say, okay, well, this isn't working, we need to, remove some of these restrictions. That's not so easy. That's going to be a problem.
When I was fighting the residency restriction laws in Cincinnati, trying to keep my place to stay, there was something that one of the councilmen, he was waffling on the issue. And, on one side he was saying, I don't really like the residency restriction laws because he saw the stuff, he saw the evidence, but he also knew they were popular. And despite having the evidence sitting right in front of his nose, he says, what I want to do is I want to pass this law and just see how it goes, and then we can always go back and undo. There is no way you can undo something. Once you open Pandora's box, you're not going to stuff those demons back into the box.
Yeah, that's the problem.
It's very challenging.
And he knew that too.
He knew it, but he didn't.
He tried to pretend that he could rationalize it in your face.
Well, they don't want to lose face. The politicians use the sex offender registry, everything they can to get a vote. When it comes time to get elected, they're going to do whatever it takes to get a vote. And if it looks like they're imposing more restrictions on the most heinous people in society, what is perceived to be the most heinous people in society, they're going to get a vote.
Yeah. Part of what we do in our groups, we're trying to fight for individuals that are afraid. Most people, they contact us out of fear. They're afraid that something's going on. SOSEN has been around for quite a few years now, and Lynn's predecessor, Mary Duval, was a major factor in getting a huge awareness into the national media. She made national media appearances,
yes,
on Fox News, on CNN.
With John Stossel.
Was on John Stossel's show.
She was fearless. She's my hero.
Yeah. Well, give me an example of, in other words, she could face off on an assertion of, give me some of the...
Well, her situation began when her son Ricky was convicted of a sex crime, and he was 16 at the time?
He was 16, and
involved with
she
a 13-year-old girl who had lied about her age. They had met at a function for the age group of 16-year-olds, and she was there, I think, with an older sister, and had lied about her age, and they met, and I think they engaged in a sexual act 2 times, and then they came knocking on his door after she ran away from home.
Oh.
And that's, and he admitted to it.
He had nothing to do.
No, had nothing to do with it.
And if this was a sane society, we could have just give them a pat on the back.
Exactly.
And the prosecutors and those who enforce these laws there is no room, no margin for understanding. There's no margin for if someone's lying or someone's trying to do the right thing. I can tell you of a case down in Florida when my case was going on. This gentleman was a youth guard, at a youth facility by day, and at nighttime he would go to a strip club. Okay, he'd go to the strip club, and there was this girl dancing, taking her clothes off for money. He hooks up with her that night at a strip club, takes her home, and he has sex with this girl, this dancer. That night passes, and he goes to work, and sometime down the road, about a month or so later, here's this girl that he had sex with that was dancing, showing up at the youth facility as a detainee. So there she is being detained. Now, he doesn't say anything, but later on, he goes back to the strip club, and there she is again, dancing and taking her clothes off for money. He tells her, he said, "You can't be here. You're underage." And she has this fake ID, and she says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here. Well, he ain't trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
He goes and tells the owner that she's an underage and she can't be here, and he didn't know that, and she had a fake ID. So he told her, you're fired. Well, later on,
The boss told her, not
the
him.
boss told the girl, you're fired, you can't no longer work here, you're underage. Well, later on, some time passes by, and back at the youth facility, she's back in there again, and they happen to do an investigation with guards who may or may not have had sexual contact with some of the detainees. Well, when they come to her, what does she do? She's aggravated, she's mad, she wants vengeance, and she says, yeah, I've had sex with him. And so they pull him out, and they question him, and he tells them what happened, and he's just trying to do the right thing. And next thing you know, he lost his job, he's been arrested, they wanted to put him in prison for 20 years,
Oh, my.
and now he's on the registry.
There's thousands
It goes
of cases
on
like that.
and on and
thousands
on.
and thousands.
What a horror. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest glaring example of the atrocities that some of these laws have perpetuated onto society. I think the most glaring and damning example we could possibly come up with was the situation in Florida, and that was really the thing that really put SOSEN into the national spotlight. As
It was
back
like
in
a
2000, when they passed the residency restriction laws in 2007, there were no places for people to live legally in Miami-Dade County. So big long bridge called the Julia Tuttle Causeway, and right in the middle there's this place run underneath one of the pillars where there's a island area, and they started the Department of Corrections for the state of Florida started sending registered sex offenders to live there. They were forced to live under the bridge.
Their address actually said Julia Tuttle Bridge. That was their address.
It became an international embarrassment. People were contacting SOSEN. Mary Duvall went down there in person with her son, and they went and met the people under the bridge. At the time, I think it was 20 or 30 people.
Yeah,
There was quite a few, and it was already
camp.
bloated there. Because you imagine, I mean, even a bridge, even a large bridge is not that much space underneath there for a person to stay.
with no amenities, no bathroom facility, nothing.
You're taking a person who's in the system, out of jail, out of prison, and you throw them in the street and you give them nowhere to go.
And well, here's the thing: the person who propagated this, who promoted this law, his name is Ron Book. He's a powerful South Florida lobbyist. He's a multi-millionaire with lots of pull. And South Florida is already a cesspool of corruption. He was already convicted once of illegal campaign contributions, felony, so he has a criminal record of his own. And but his motivation is his daughter was molested by a nanny, a female nanny, who, if these laws existed, Megan's Law, residency restrictions law, all these things that he's pushing for, which he's the one who pushed the residency restriction laws to be 2,500 feet, which is more than Florida's 1,000 feet. All those laws would not have protected her daughter because her daughter was molested by a nanny who was not on the list and who was a female. So, it's a moot point, but he's doing it out of revenge. And, we butted heads with Ron Book. Mary Duvall and she had a co-host, Kevin. They were doing a talk show, online radio show called Americans Reality Check. So you can still find it online. But Ron Book invited Ron Book on, or they invited Ron Book to be on the show. I was just a person that called in, and Ron Book was defending his actions. And the guy just kind of went off the deep end with the longer we were talking as it went on. But he's so rabid about it. And the big quagmire about this guy is that he's also the head of the Miami-Dade County Homeless Trust. So he's entrusted to help these individuals no longer be homeless, but yet he's the individual who passed the laws to put them right there. And he drags his daughter in there along with it, and everything. So, he creates the very laws that he's entrusted to fight, so it puts him in a very interesting position. And they abandoned, he got them to go in there and tear the camp down. We actually called the camp Bookville. after named
Named
after
after him.
him.
Oh.
So now, 2 years later, now that because they destroyed the camp in 2010.
Oh, they did.
Yes.
And all they did was play musical sex offender. They put them here, they put them there, they put them in a hotel for a couple months. And Ron Book was sitting there promising these people, I will put you in this place for 6 months. You can get back on your feet, get you a job, get your own place. They reluctantly agreed, and what happened was after a month and a half, he yanked it out from under them, told them to get the hell out of where they were at. So there they were back on the street. They went to a parking lot of the State Department of Rehabilitation Corrections to stay there. They slept there. Now they started congregating in a new place called Shorecrest, which is not very far from the Julia Tuttle Causeway. And we started calling it Bookville too, the sequel, the bad sequel that nobody wanted. So Ron Book, actually, I think that's the reason why the Examiner went after me, because I wrote an article calling it Ron Book, the new Bookville 2, the sequel nobody wanted, and I discussed the whole history of the Julia Tuttle Causeway and everything. So now what they did was they made this makeshift park. They found that there was an empty lot that's really somebody's backyard, and there's this big ugly looking swamp tree back there, and an empty lot that's got something that looks like an old broken down gazebo, and they took 2 old beat up toys that people, that little kids sit on. They put it out there, and they put a little sign out there and called it Little River Park. And they did that for the sole purpose that they know that sex offenders can't live close to a park, so they made this park in hopes to get these people out of here.
Oh.
So the saga continues.
Forgive me, I didn't pay enough attention, and I'm a little unclear in my head. What is the language, the regulation for the impossibility of living within the Florida space? They say you just plain can't
The
live.
state has a
Florida's-
1,000-foot law.
No, some of them, it depends on county.
Well, I was getting to that. State has a 1,000-foot statewide residency restriction against schools and places children congregate. Well, when you say that, that's vague already. But what happened was there was this, there's this little, I've seen it with the states, but this, municipalities have been guilty of doing it too, is one area decides they're going to up the ante a little bit. So then all of a sudden there's this mad dash to do the same thing. We're going to pass it because what's going to happen is all the the ones that's going to follow the law, they're all going to move, and they're going to move somewhere else, and we don't want them here. So they did it, and then this town over here did it, and then all of a sudden they started lighting it up everywhere. So pretty much all of South Florida is like this now.
So if you draw a circle around every forbidden zone, the circles intersect and cover everything?
Yes.
Cover most of the city and drives
Yeah.
everybody out of the city. Now, all cities some cities are still at 1,000 feet, and some of them are up to 2,500 feet.
Florida is very unique in their own brand of idiotic logic. As a matter of fact, the joke site fart.com even has a section devoted to just Florida news, because Florida is so stupid that it's a state that's easily made fun of. Okay, here's Florida logic for you. New Jersey, Supreme Court had ruled that Megan's Law trumps any subsequent law. So when they passed residency restrictions, the Supreme Court said you cannot do that because Megan's Law trumps it, and therefore you cannot pass these residency restriction laws. Well, instead of the courts in Florida saying the same thing, what you have is State Senator David Ehrenberg getting on TV and says, well, the residency restrictions are bad because they're causing all these problems. The Julia Tuttle Causeway in Miami, Florida, the huge amount of homeless individuals. So what we should do is we should increase the statewide residency restriction laws from 1,000 feet to 1,750 feet. Therefore, there will be some places in Miami that these people can legally stay. So we're going to up it all over the state instead of just simply forcing the city to enforce the laws that were already in place. That's Florida logic for you. We're going to make the whole state worse just to better one small area of Florida.
From one state to another, it's different. It's not all the same. There are some states where you cannot have more than one sex offender living in a house. And here's the problem with that is when you get nowhere to live. Then they start to congregate just only to find somewhere to live. Then you got the media coming up behind that and saying, oh, they're congregating together, they're very devious people, they are trying to come up with plans, and they're very smart and they're very clever. They're congregating together so they can commit more sex crimes. That's what the media does. So now we're fighting it over here, they're fighting it over here. You know, they're fighting restrictions on residency. They find somewhere to live, and then the media they're fighting that they're demonizing them, and so it's a pounding that never ends, and it's driving many offenders right off the list. They don't even register anymore. They disappear.
Now, what have been some of the forms of legal challenge besides writing letters? Have there been any arguments? You were saying Megan, but in general, any pending challenges in the federal courts? It's a tough one, isn't it?
There have been lots of challenges over the years. This is the problem we face from a legal standpoint. In 2003 was the landmark case Smith versus Doe, which was the Megan's Law. Lower courts had been, they've been pretty contrary on how they viewed it. And what the United States Supreme Court had at that time was that Megan's Law was a, quote, regulatory action. So like our laws against nuclear waste dumping in certain areas. So that's how they compared it. And they said because it's regulatory, even if there's a criminal penalty attached to it, because it's regulatory, the United States Constitution does not apply to these kinds of laws because the intent is not to punish, but to regulate certain activity. So they've been using that justification ever since Smith versus Doe. Every time they pass a new law, they go back and say, look at Smith v. Doe. It happened in my own case when I fought residency restriction laws. I put forth a great constitutional argument, and they just went back and pointed to Smith v. Doe and say, oh, Smith v. Doe, it's regulatory, not punitive, therefore your whole argument is garbage.
Yeah.
Can you go through your arguments?
It is punitive, and it's especially punitive to families as well. I mean, when people think of the word sex offender, they're picturing just one guy who is single, lives alone, going out preying on kids. Well, most that are registered are married or have some kind of relationship.
A healthy relationship.
A healthy relationship most often, and a lot of them have children. And nobody considers what these laws do to families, especially children. There, in the Paula Gloria show that there's been children who have committed suicide because of it. You have a program at school, and they're doing a sex offender program at school. They get all the kids in the assembly, and they go up on there and they show pictures of known sex offenders in the neighborhood. Well, their daughter or their son could be sitting in the audience. How is that going to make them feel?
And there's a picture of their parent.
Yeah, up on the screen.
The shame that the children are having to deal with has driven some to suicide.
Oh yeah, and they're taunted, they're bullied. These kids can't have kids come over and play at their house or spend the night, because
you talk about the protection of children, and
and
look what we're doing to them.
These are the ones that are left behind, the children that are affected by the sex offender registry, and there's a lot more of them than are being victimized by the registry.
It's not even that. The neighbors, how it affects the neighbors,
Yes.
how it affects the neighborhood. It affects property value. When you got this registry open up like this, you have someone that lives in your neighborhood that if you're a neighbor and you want to sell your house and someone wants to buy your house, but you've got a registered offender, oh, there goes your property value.
This is so true.
Oh, wow. So
it's affecting things on many levels that people are so eager to just jump on this bandwagon of this registry and all these restrictions, but they don't realize the backlash that could come on them personally as a neighbor.
So when you're buying property and you're doing a title search, it's going to come up if you got a registered sex offender living there?
Well, all they have to do is, if a potential buyer wants to check out the neighborhood, one of the biggest questions that people ask is, what's the school like? What's the school look like
Right.
here? Well, a question might be, well, who are the sex offenders that are living in this neighborhood?
Are
All
there
they have
any
to
sex
do,
offenders?
all they have to do is look on the internet. It's right there. Every state has an online registry, and many states have county registries, so they can even go into the county registry.
You can find out who's in your neighborhood without knowing their name just by going to the area.
Yeah, you punch in your zip code.
And in addition
And
to the
poof,
state
they're all there.
registries, there are private entities. Oprah, if you watch enough Oprah Winfrey shows, you will see her promoting a site called Family Watchdog, and people treat that like it's gospel. I'm going to tell you right now, Family Watchdog is very inaccurate. I mean, I'm not
As
even
are
on
the registries.
I like
They're
Family
very
Watchdog
inaccurate.
because I am not on their list, even though I'm on Megan's Law, but they,
Oh,
for some
yeah.
reason I'm not on their little map. So
Yeah, and then there's those that are on the list that never been arrested for a sexual offense.
Oh, wow.
So it's the system.
Well, we
the system
have-
as usual is not working.
well, you know, on my website, which is also called Once Fallen, I have a
Wait,
list.
say it a little louder.
Yeah,
Called
Once Fallen.
Once fallen.
Once Fallen.
Dot.
Yeah, oncefallen.com. There's a site you can Google it. There's a page on my site you can Google it. I call it "You Might Be a Sex Offender If," and I have a list of cases where people faced time on the registry. Some people are actually on the registry. Some of the weirdest cases that are out there. The married couples in Oregon who had consensual sex in a park got caught in, of all places, Salem, Massachusetts, or Salem, Oregon, I should say. So I just thought it was funny because of the reference to, you know,
That's enough
Salem.
to get you on the list.
But well, for some reason, it was only the husbands were forced to register, so they're on the registry in Oregon.
But not the wives.
But not the wives. You know, that was.
And it was simply for the public nature of it.
Yes, simply because it's technically a public indecency charge, which is a registerable offense in Oregon.
And how general is urinating in public? Is different
Some states actually have had to pass legislation to prevent public urinators from being on the list because it's considered public indecency. And public indecency is a registerable offense in many states. And yes, there are individuals on that list who have done nothing but urinate in public. And then there's this guy in Illinois that made headlines a few years ago. What had happened was he was driving in a suburban, and this 14-year-old girl, not watching what she was doing, runs in front of the car, and he slams on the brake. And he's angry. He's, you know, road rage. He gets out. He grabs this girl by the arm to chastise her, and he's yelling at her for being, you know, inconsiderate. And the mother catches it. He gets arrested for a assault charge for grabbing her arm. Well, it was considered a registrable offense because of the age of the victim. So now this individual for the last 5 years or so has been on the public sex offender registry in Illinois.
Wow.
And there was no sexual connotation involved in his case at all.
So is there some blanket legislation along these lines to cure it that you would wish upon our society?
Well, what I would like to see is I would like to see the public registry not be public.
There you go. I
The
agree.
public cannot handle the information that is on the registry. There are a whole lot of people out there who get very angry when they discover that there's a sex offender living in their neighborhood, and they will go and they will, you know, cause harm to the people living in that home.
Which is perceived that way.
Yes,
If
yes.
they don't know how to handle that information because they don't understand the information.
And you know, of course, the children of the people that are on the registry, they're being taunted and bullied. If the registry was put back into the hands of law enforcement only, and you only put those that really needed monitoring on the registry, imagine how much more effective law enforcement would be in protecting the public, which is what the registry is supposed to be doing.
I'd like to take this a
But
step
not.
further, and I'd like to
Not,
say that
yeah.
the registry itself is worthless because every time you drive a vehicle and you get pulled over and that officer takes your ID and walks back to his car, he punches you through a computer called the NCIC, and anybody who watches those crime shows knows what it is. But it's a big national database that they have. Every record you have comes up. They do not need that because every time you go through a checkpoint, and now most of your ID cards, they got that little thing on the back. You know, they swipe, and all your information instantly pops up. Boom, your whole criminal history pops up. They don't need the registry. You know, they can punch it into a computer and see where people live. They keep all this documentation. So for them to make the justification that they need to have a public list handy
It's obsolete.
is absolutely nonsense.
True.
Yeah.
Whoa. You know, identify with the Occupy people, and we have problems here with the economic system, and but here we're talking about needless suffering just because of basically the corruption of the political process. And what we haven't talked about that much is the corruption of the media process. But when you've appealed to the media to help make things right, you had mentioned Oprah, but even within the newspapers, the journalists, the anchor people, what have been your experiences dealing with the media?
Well, have I got one for you. I was contacted last, I think, November by the producer of the Dr. Drew show. And they wanted my opinion on the Sandusky case, which was hot in the news at that moment, particularly Dottie Sandusky. They wanted to know why a woman would hold her silence and what would motivate her to do that. And being the wife of a registered sex offender, they wanted my opinion on this. And I was promised over and over and over again that this would be the topic and that they would be fair and understanding and all that. And I went down to Little Rock to do a remote studio segment, and I didn't see anything. TV screen camera was pointed right at me, so I wasn't able to see any of the people that were in the interview. But there was another woman, I think her name was Jane Lewis or something. Anyway, she had written a book, and then there was myself and Dr. Drew. And as soon as I put the earpiece in my ear and I hear the language that they were using, I was married to a pedophile. That was kind of the name of the program. I knew then that I was
set up.
And I was
don't forget,
ambushed.
they put it right on the camera. It is,
It's under my name.
under her name, it's got, quote, "I married a pedophile."
Yeah, and I never have married a pedophile. And then he actually had the gall to accuse me of being attracted to pedophiles. He used those words. He actually said that to me. And I was just, because as a child I was molested by a family member. Once he heard that, nothing else
They knew
mattered.
everything. Already was. She was. It was already
Yeah.
laid out. They knew their story, whether she knew it or not. They already knew.
They totally ambushed me. He continually interrupted me. He was very rude. And within 5 minutes it was over. And I had nothing to say, you know. I couldn't defend myself or anything.
That's why this here is a blessing to us, and
Yes.
we're very appreciative of
Very
Paula
welcome.
and of you, and anything else that this station does for us. That we're giving us an opportunity to really expose the truth of the matter, and the public needs to know the truth.
Yes.
They need to really know, so they're not misled, and they don't have to live in fear. And maybe they can even help us out by helping them out and getting some things changed.
So that
Because
is
we all want the same thing. We all want to protect
None
children.
of us are for any hurting of any child or any other human being. None of us are. But the injustice is coming in a way that it's difficult to stand up for yourself when everybody in the media is stepping on you.
Yeah.
So to have you have us on your show, we're very, very honored and very, very privileged and very, very grateful.
Well, it is a good argument for public access and this Manhattan Neighborhood Network community channel that it is some antidote to the problems of our commercialized information system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some more media stories?
Yeah. Well, I think,
Or whatever you want to talk about.
my media just in general, I've had about a dozen appearances over the years. Some have been really good, some have been really bad. I've had instances where I've dealt with people like Dr. Drew, and I'd like to mention, anybody who doesn't know who Dr. Drew is, he got his start as the celebrity psychologist for certain stars, and more in particular MTV reality television. What the media on the national level loves to do is they love to create conflict. What they want us to do, and that's probably the reason why I don't get as many appearances as I should, is they want somebody who's going to come in and either get the deer in the headlight stare to look like a complete buffoon, or they're going to have somebody angry, stomping on the floor. And they want me to get angry, because if I get angry and I'm pounding my fist
Make
and
you look
I'm
bad.
yelling at you and I'm pointing a finger at you, you're an idiot or a moron. They're going to point right back at me and say that right there is the reason why we have to pass more legislation, because look at this guy.
You're out of control.
You are
Yeah.
out of control. You are out of control.
Yeah.
Oh, and they don't just say it like that. They this whole condescending thing. And what I have noticed in dealing with the media, even if I'm not being interviewed directly, I'm merely critiquing the media on a particular story that's bad, is they have their spin on the story, and they are not going to deviate from that one iota, no matter how much information you put out there. They will say, do not confuse me with the facts. I have made up my
Yeah.
mind.
Oh, that's a good point.
I have heard that as well. Do not confuse me with the facts. I have made up my mind.
Crazy.
Simple, yeah. Trying to reason with those people.
Well, I mind putting myself in the public light, but when we do, we put ourselves
At risk.
at risk. Me personally, I have no less than half a dozen dedicated websites to telling the world how I'm supposedly the world's biggest pedophile or something along. I don't know what they say. I don't read it that much anymore. At first it used to bother me, and it works to a point to some people, because the uneducated, uninformed individual is merely going to do a Google search and look at the first thing they read and assume, okay, if it's on the internet, it must be true. We are a society that do not put a lot of faith into deep research. Most people do not take the time to read a lot of material, so what they do is they look on the TV show and they see 2 minutes worth of footage, and now they are armchair legal analysts, and now I know everything there is to know about this subject because I watched Nancy Grace.
Yeah.
Let's go look at your books. That's a good idea.
I wanted it because we all have our stories, and it's so intense that's why we wrote our stories, because our stories will help the individual, the reader, the general public, to really understand the truth. Because you're not getting the truth in the media, you're not getting the truth on the websites, or the Registry website.
I think hold it up a little higher. There you go.
So we wrote our books to help people really understand the stories behind it, what led to these convictions, or to these people, to anyone who's landed on the Registry, our personal stories, and it does put us out there.
What have the readers been telling you back to read your book?
Well, you can go to Amazon and you can find out for yourself. There's reviews out there. I'm getting good reviews. However, I am getting one reviewer who's in the book who doesn't like what I have to say, doesn't like the truth, or doesn't want to know the truth. Some people just want to believe what they want to believe. And he's a character in the book, and he's out there trying to
Make trouble.
as he does, and really all he does, anytime he does something,
He looks
on
like
my
a
review,
read it
he just
now.
confirms what I say in the book. Just one of those type of individuals. So our books are designed to let the reader or the public know that just because you're on the Registry doesn't mean you're an immoral person, or that you're an evil person, or that you're bad for. In fact, it could be quite the opposite, and in most cases is the opposite.
About 95%.
Hold up your book again. Toward the end, for the people who came in late.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, there it is.
And Derek has a book too online. Oh yeah. Meanwhile, Derek, you can get
There
ready
we
to.
Joe, show her her camera. She doesn't know her camera.
Okay. No, I don't. I can't even see the cameras.
I think it's
Right.
there.
over here.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Am I there?
There's a little glare I see. You could-
A little glare?
Yeah, and I gave her a review of the book on the back of her.
Yeah.
So
Now, have
Yeah.
you noticed that when you go with the media that they don't want you live? They want to be able to doctor it up with editing?
I've seen that most of the time. I don't think of it. Well,
they
I
do
did.
edit it. Oh,
Yeah, they
yeah.
edited a lot. See, my last major media appearance was on a show called Russia Today. So it's primarily in Russia, but they do have an American branch.
Yeah. Now,
I
I'm a
was
fan of
contact-
Russia Today. I would hope better for them than the rest of the characters.
you know, they contacted me in the morning. It was on the concept of castration laws, and I had just done my research on it about no more than 48 hours before, because they at least gave me a few days to do my counter argument. Well, you can go online and find it. I usually post links to all my media appearances on the front page of my Once Fallen website, and you can scroll down and find the media appearances section. You can look at the interview. Well, the actual interview was 15 minutes long, but all you will see is about a 45 to 90 second sound bite of some things that I say, and it can easily be taken out of context. And as somebody who is well versed in the media, I try to be so careful as to things that cannot be misconstrued. Yeah. Well, we see, you know what, not trying to go too far off topic, but we see that recently in this Trayvon Martin shooting incident. They took the media got blasted because they took the 911 tape and they cut and put sounds together to make it sound like he was racially profiling, when in reality he was asked what they thought the person's race was, and then he responded. But what they did was they cut the 911 part out and they put the two together and made it look worse than what it really was. The media does this an awful lot, you know, and I think it's intentional, to be honest with you. I believe they do it on purpose.
Sensationalism. They do it for sensationalism, which does it for ratings. So this is another area that we have to deal with this concept.
I had this roundabout with CNN about. They called me a convicted pedophile, and I would not accept them to use that term with me, and I wrote them, like, if you do not remove that term immediately, I am going to sue the living hell out of your corporation. They did it 6 hours later. They went back and rewrote the article and just put, you know, sex offender instead of the term convicted pedophile. But by then the damage had been done. Yeah. People were contacting me because they saw the word convicted pedophile. And I want to tell you right now, there is no such thing as a convicted pedophile, because the term, you cannot be convicted of having the condition of pedophilia. You can be convicted of a sex crime, and the media needs to quit using that term. But that damage has already been done. They saw that term. I started getting hate mail. I got threats. Somebody threatened me from her workplace. I called her workplace back and told her boss what she had been doing on the company dime, and I don't know whatever happened to her, but I assume it wasn't very nice, because she never bothered me again, though.
So we're coming to an end. I do want to thank you for being courageous fighters for what's fair. I think that's what I'm hearing, that one more dimension of the rottenness of our culture, the rottenness of our government, the rottenness of our system is the unfair misery. Yes. You've given a good account of yourselves. And again, I guess, just spell out your names for us.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for having us on again. My name's Ken. Last name is Kish, K-I-S-H, author of Despised Things, www.despisedthings.com.
And I am Lynn Gilmore, which is L-Y-N-N-G-I-L-M-O-R-E, and I'm the author of Consensual Consequences. It is available on Amazon, as well as through my blog, which is on Blogspot. I'm not quite sure what the URL is, so I'll just leave it at that.
And Derek?
Yes, I am Derek Logue, first name spelled D-E-R-E-K, last name spelled L-O-G-U-E, and my book is called Once Fallen, and my website is also called Once Fallen.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the opportunity.
You did speak well and clear.